We just launched in October in Minneapolis. How many of you knew about General Assembly before coming here? Wow, that's so many. Great, so General Assembly, for those of you who don't know, launched in 2011 in New York City. It was born out of 4 guys working in a co-working space who really saw a need for skills-based training. They were kind of teaching each other various skills in web development, software development, and it really turned into an education company from there. So fast forward to today, we have over 30 campuses globally, and Minneapolis was the last one to launch. And so our model is still the same in that we are trying to bring career-changing tech training to as many people as possible. But here we're doing it through free events like this one today. And we are also doing short form classes and workshops. So anything from 2 to 6 hours in things that make sense, like software development, user experience design, data analytics. And then also some things that are a little bit of a departure from traditional General Assembly coursework. So things like Instagram for business, building your personal brand. And all of those things are on our website, which I can direct you to. It's just ga.co, and then you can locate Minneapolis in there. And then we also have part-time and full-time programming online in things for either upskilling or reskilling. So again, like user experience design, data analytics, data science. And all of that is to say, I couldn't be more excited to see all of you in this room. We have an amazing panel of people, and Val was huge in bringing these people together. I happen to work at a co-working space with you as well, but Katrina for sure, and I couldn't be more excited about bringing this conversation to you. And my name's Maygen, by the way. I don't think I said that, but hello. I'm Maygen. And I would actually like these 3 to introduce themselves, because I think that's a little bit more powerful than me speaking for them. And then we'll get started on some questions, and then after the panel discussion, I'm going to open it up to you all to ask questions as well. So take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Val, for putting this together and for bringing us here. My name is Caroline Karanja, and generally I am interested in using technology as a tool, not just for building services and products that can help us, like basically help everyone, or that are meant for everyone, but then also using tech as a tool to build financial and personal freedom and wealth for different communities that often have not always had those opportunities. I run Hack the Gap, which is an organization focused on getting and keeping more women and non-binary people in tech. And we do that by creating shared experiences, most notably through our hackathons. Has anyone here by any chance heard of Hack the Gap or been to our hackathons? Oh, yeah. Awesome, great, thank you.
Cool. Hello, my name is Katrina Anderson. I am the CEO and co-founder of ClinicianNexus, which is a software platform that allows health systems to proactively carve out their capacity to teach nursing students, medical students, physician assistant students, and so on, so that those students can actually easily access all of those available experiences and also share that with their school partners that are just across the street. We kind of say it's like LinkedIn meets Airbnb for clinical education.
Good morning. Thanks to Minneapolis Television for hosting this. My name is Lynn Wehrman. I'm the founder and president of WeCo Accessibility Services, and we are a for-profit group of digital technologists who all happen to live with disabilities. And our mission is to help organizations, large and small, make websites, software, mobile applications, anything that's digital, accessible to people who live with disabilities across disability types.
Excellent. What a panel, right? The first Women in Tech breakfast, and this is who we have. So, holy cow. What I want to hear about first, and we can start with you, Katrina, and you guys can kind of pass it along, is what inspired you, or what was your path into getting into the field that you're in today? I know it's a big question.
Yes. Well, fun fact, my undergraduate degree is in communications, and I had an emphasis in video production. So
you're right at home.
Yeah, I was like, this is my place. I love this.
Watch out.
My dream was that I wanted to start a television show. I still do. It's still I work on it in my free time for fun. Yeah. Yes. So that was my kind of original piece. I think actually when I was in high school, I wanted to become a dental hygienist, and I had one of my video production teachers, I just took it for fun, said, you should go get your 4-year degree. I think that you're an incredible editor, and I think you should go pursue this. And so without that, I would have probably been cleaning teeth this morning instead of being here. But I'm very grateful for that teacher, but it landed me into this kind of trajectory where I was going into video production. And I was kind of trying to define what that looked like for myself. And then at the end of my senior year of college, my husband was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then that kind of just changed everything for me. So he was diagnosed about New Year's of 2011, and then that kind of put us on a path of hanging out at the hospital. I ended up getting a job in a clinic. I fell in love with how powerful that first person was when you walk into the door of a hospital. It kind of makes or breaks your attitude a lot. And so worked as a registrar at a Health Partners clinic actually in Wisconsin. And then I ended up finding an internship for video production at Health Partners. And they were looking to hire someone that would help create videos for enterprise-wide education and primarily clinical education. So that's how I got into clinical education. One of our vice presidents ended up sunsetting a lot of our content creation and thought, we really need to move into content curation because we have a lot of medical education content. Clinicians struggle to actually consume and find the most appropriate information. And it just began this whole other project where we were like, wait a minute, we don't even know who's learning in our hospitals. We don't know who's teaching in our hospitals. We did, not to say that we didn't have that, but we didn't have a good technology solution for actually accurately tracking that, knowing who our teachers were, knowing who our students were, knowing who we could hire out of those people that we taught. And it just kind of got me into this interesting project. We had a skunkworks project, and I fell in love with organizational communication towards the end of my undergraduate degree, and that kind of just began the project. So I think at that time I was very inspired without knowing it to help improve the experiences that patients can have through your experience with your clinician as they're being educated. And so my husband inspires me for this a lot of the time. That's the shortest version of that I've ever shared.
Wow, way to go. I didn't time it, but we can look back at the tape and get some real data for you. How about you, Lynn?
Well, I often say that my career was a professional perfect storm. I have a background in communications, and I had a long career in sales, selling just about everything you can think of, including high-end banking products. But I found myself really wanting to get off the sales treadmill. And so I landed a job with the Minneapolis TMO as an employer outreach specialist at a time when they said, we're tired of hiring transportation planners that want to sit at their desk and plan. We need somebody that can get out there and sell people on, multimodal transportation, that can go out to the office towers, get people to have their companies signed up for Metro Pass and things like that. So I thought, great, I can sell, but on one condition, you've got to let me write for this job. So I wound up writing their new brochures. I had a degree in communications. I wanted to get that used. I helped them set up a new website. And I landed eventually at the Minnesota Department of Transportation Office of Transit as a Rural Transit Assistance Program Coordinator. But like a lot of people who aren't really cut out for government and who are really purpose-driven, it wasn't a really good fit because I didn't mesh with that environment very well. And consequently got sidelined for being a little bit too good at my job, and wound up in a communications capacity with Commissioner Tom Sorrell's flagship initiative of the Americans with Disabilities Act Transition Plan. At that time, MnDOT was trying desperately to get inventoried all of their infrastructure that needed to be upgraded. They were really trying to address the needs of users living with disabilities, and I was brought in to figure out how to communicate that to the public at a time when people knew that websites were inaccessible. They didn't really know what that meant. They didn't know how to fix it. And so I wound up just wading into this project that was, you know, trying to fend off lawsuits, trying to deal with a stakeholder group who lived with disabilities. And I sat down with the stakeholder advisory board and said, I need to go into your homes. I need to figure out how you're using websites before I can develop ours to get this message out. I wound up learning how inaccessible even our meeting agendas were to people. And I was very fortunate that I was able to work with Janet Peters of the Great Lakes ADA Center, who taught me that accessibility wasn't just about someone who couldn't see a page, it was about someone who maybe had a hand tremor and couldn't select a link, and people living with cognitive disabilities of a wide variety, people with hearing disabilities. And having grown up in a family with generations of people living with cognitive disabilities, mental illness, and epilepsy, it really made me realize that I had found where I needed to be. And watching this advisory board work with MnDOT employees, I saw the power of people living with disabilities coming together with people who were trying to meet their needs. And we saw in digital accessibility at that time, believe it or not, there was really nobody who lived with a disability that was heading a company or heading an effort. It was being done with software checkers. And when I started to pitch to different organizations the fact that we were going to start to launch user experience testers who lived with disabilities, that they might be better equipped than the software, I literally heard back from the clients and the manufacturers that software was better equipped to understand the needs of people living with disabilities than the people themselves. That was normal in those days. So we really were formed to create employment and to create a paradigm shift on recognizing that people who lived with disabilities could understand and translate their own needs. So.
Wow, that's a really great story. And for you?
So I have to say, I think my journey up until this point has been really organic and accidental to some degree as well. My degree is from McAllister College for American Studies. And so if you know anything about McAllister by any chance, you'll know it's very, very sort of social justice driven in terms of like how they talk about who they are and how they show up, things like that. Towards my senior year of college, I was having a really hard time figuring out what I wanted to do. And I ended up deciding that I was either going to spend my time basically like catching up on all of the Shonda Rhimes shows that I possibly could up until that point, while I like started applying for jobs, or one of my friends had started doing like web development, and I just thought that that was super interesting. I was really curious about it. And so I opted to do a little bit of both, but actually ended up falling in love with just building websites and trying to figure out how it works. And this was before, you know, things like edX and Team Treehouse and all those other websites where you could go and actually learn the process of building websites and web applications, and even like what is the difference. That's before this was really popular or even available. So, you know, Google at the point was definitely my best friend. Stacked Overflow, if you know what I'm talking about, definitely my best friend. And I spent the last, you know, 3/4 of my senior year just teaching myself how to code. And by the time I was done, I had started to sort of pick up small projects here and there, you know, for free to build websites for my friends who were artists, or just people who were in the nonprofit space and they were looking for, you know, a web page here or there, things like that. But after college, I ended up working at 3 companies, all within sort of the tech and data teams, and I really, really enjoyed it. But I often found myself as the only person, right? The only woman, the only person of color, the only person sort of living within that intersectionality. And so I also somehow ended up, you know, being asked to sort of help address the diversity challenge, right? Now, luckily, I was genuinely interested in this. Definitely would not advise just asking, you know, whatever woman is on your team to like help you with this or any of that stuff. But because I had this degree in American Studies and because of the environment that I was in, I was passionate about it. I was passionate about thinking about how it looks like within the tech space. And so that's where kind of this part of my world that's a little bit focused on equity and inclusion and belonging really started to show up. And I was also in a space where people were curious. They did want to hear what my perspective was and what I would do if I was in a position to do something about some of these things. Now, whether or not they did the things that, you know, I recommended or others recommended, you know, that was always sort of a little bit up in the air, depending on the company and the managers. But by the time that I decided I wanted to take some time off, I realized that I genuinely enjoyed having conversations with people and helping them draft initiatives or action plans around how to make their spaces a place where really people did want to feel like they belong, and also to make the decisions as to where things just weren't a good fit. And so that kind of spun out a little bit of consulting work that I ended up doing. But in the meantime, I started building websites, web applications for a number of different types of organizations, from the city of Minneapolis to a lot of small startups and small businesses. And I really genuinely enjoyed all that work. But within that whole sort of time period, I was also kind of dabbling and engaging in and out of different meetup groups that were just, you know, focused on different things. So when I was really interested in Python, I would go to a lot of the Python meetups. So when I was interested in UX UI, I would go to some of those. And just without really knowing it, I ended up kind of putting myself in this place where I could have sort of shared experiences and a little bit of sort of paired programming with different people, different amazing mentors around town that really helped me grow my skill set to the point where it is right now. And when Hack the Gap first happened, I don't remember what year it was, but I was really excited about it. I participated in the first Hack the Gap and went on to participate in different ways in a couple of the other ones after that. But when Kristen Womack, who's one of the co-founders of Hack the Gap, was looking to focus more on MENA families, I had this opportunity to sort of take that legacy and continue to kind of push it forward. And so that's how I ended up with this great opportunity to continue to run Hack the Gap. But in the midst of all of that, I mean, I had started to do a lot of work with different types of organizations around equity, the way that looks like within their organizations, doing some work in healthcare, doing some work in education, and building a platform to really help serve those different sectors. And so I think that, you know, one of my biggest challenges within this process has been how to make sure that the work that people are doing is truly sustainable and it's not performative, right? That people are actually continuing to live forward and continue to drive those actions and continuing to get feedback from the employees who are in those spaces that they're in. And so in the work that I do, I'm very, very cognizant of making sure that that's part of the way that we have those conversations. But I'm more invested in making sure that people who look like me and people who don't look like me have those opportunities to pursue their own passions and their own careers and to live a life where they feel like they are in those spaces where they do belong and that they can be and bring their best selves.
Super cool. I always love hearing about why people get into what they get into. And I find in a lot of these stories, and maybe you all can relate, there's always some element of serendipity, certainly in my career as well. And I would love to hear you have a conversation around things that you wish you knew when you were just starting out, whether in your role like as a founder or a CEO, or even before that. Like looking back, I certainly have advice I wish I could have given to myself 10 years ago. But there may be people out there who could benefit from your advice to yourself right now. So I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Who's first?
I'll start. I would say don't be afraid of what you know, because sometimes you truly do have an original idea that nobody else has had. And I think that when I look back at when we started WeCo, you know, particularly when we started to gain momentum, we started to realize how very different we were in the field. And we also learned how distrustful people were of the opinions of people who live with disabilities. Now, I know I don't look disabled, but I grew up with a lifelong disability that carries a lot of taboos. I outgrew epilepsy. I have generations of people in my family with epilepsy, sisters that still deal with it. And I grew up with profound depression and borderline personality disorder traits. So those are things people don't want to talk about. And so I think that I was really used to questioning myself, because from the time I was very young, my validity was always challenged. Whether, and my sisters, I mean, I got very used to my sisters being made fun of at school because they had absent seizures at school. You know, when people talk about shaming these days, I always go, goodness, the way I grew up, now that was shaming. You know, where people openly made fun of my sister's epileptic seizures. You know, I hope schools aren't like that anymore. I know my daughter's school experience wasn't like that, but I think, you know, if I looked at myself back then, I would just say, just because what you're doing is really radical and different and doesn't fit the industry now, you need to trust your gut and you need to move forward, which we're clearly doing now. But we were pretty hesitant in the early days, and I think we would have gotten farther faster if I had trusted my instinct. So
That's good. So I was thinking about Lynn and I followed Lynn into the co-working space that we're in now. She paved the way. We were in a different space that was in downtown Minneapolis probably 2 or 3 years ago now. And I don't know where you parked, but I had to park in ramp B in downtown Minneapolis, and then you walk about 10 to 15 minutes through the skyways to get there. And I realized as I was going through that, there was a lot of construction. There was this huge project to redo the Target Center, and we'd walk through it every day just to get to the office. And as I was thinking about what do I wish I would have told myself, I think there was a gift in walking through that construction zone, because I realized that I wish I would give myself permission to be okay being under construction a lot. You kind of have to be under construction in front of people a lot of the time if you want to move forward in your career, wherever you are, whatever stage you are, if you're transitioning, if you're doing anything. And I think there's a real bravery in being vulnerable enough to let people walk through your halls or walk through the construction zone while it's happening. And I think that there's still value in that, and there's still usefulness. And maybe someone walks by and says, hey, maybe you should paint it this color instead of the color you were going to, if you let people in, and it can shape what that looks like. So I'm like, it's very interesting that I was somehow like, that was under construction, and now my husband and I just moved into a newer apartment that you can see construction happening, and I'm like, this is everywhere. It's like following me. So I think there's something there with that, but that would be it's okay. And I'm very grateful for the people that have been really gracious with me being under construction, because it's super awkward to I was never clearly on a trajectory to become a CEO. And I've had to evolve into that pretty rapidly. It's like 15 fire hoses I'm trying to hold on to. And so I'm just grateful. Even I'm still under construction right now. I'm growing all the time. So thanks for letting me be under construction.
Such a great metaphor. I love that. I definitely would just double down on the trusting your gut. I mean, I think that whenever I've come across a really difficult challenge, like everything my gut told me to make a different decision, and I didn't, right? So I would definitely just go back and tell myself, like, the second you have a gut feeling, the second time you have it, like, you know, really think about what is going on there. The next thing I would say is just that I wish I could just tell myself to just be myself. I grew up when we first moved to the U.S., I went to like a really predominantly black school, and it was a charter school, and it was a STEM-focused school, and I just felt like it was such a great environment for the person who I became today. But we very quickly moved to a suburb that was predominantly white and lacked diversity in every single sense of the word. And not just the curriculum, not just the people, not just the representation in terms of teachers and staff. And I think a lot of that put me in a place where I didn't really see the value that I brought to the table, not just as, you know, a human, but then also like all of my experiences, my culture, all these different things. I worked really hard to sort of strip all of that from me. And I noticed it too going into a professional workplace, right? I very distinctly, I used to have a nose piercing. I took it out because I was like, people aren't going to like accept what I look like and who I am if I bring who I am to the table. And I think part of it was that that's how I was being socialized to go into the workplace. But then I also think that there's things that that like made it so that I wasn't sort of being fully myself in those spaces, and I think that it put me in a position not necessarily to be my best self there. And so I just wish I could go back and just tell myself to just be me and like let that evolution to continue to be, and to really just be cognizant of any sort of assimilation that was going on that wasn't really beneficial to like my personal and professional growth. Because now it's like I'm pulling back on a lot of those things and trying to revive them. And I think that even through Hack the Gap, we see people just saying that they're able to come in and just be who they are, their full selves, and that's how we're able to build entire products, you know, IoT software in the span of 36 hours. It's because people aren't doing a lot of those things. At least that's what they've shared back to us.
Yeah, that's really wonderful to hear. So I think then I would like to talk a little bit about advocacy. It sounds like to a certain degree you all kind of had to internally and externally advocate for yourselves, which I think is a shared experience probably for a lot of people in the room. But were there people, I would assume that there must have been people throughout that were also advocating for you or celebrating you, or were your champions as you were working on these things and working hard at being authentic as you were building what you are building what you are now. And so I would just love to hear a little bit about who advocated for you or how they advocated for you, especially when you were kind of working in the early stages of your processes.
I could go on and on forever about how much people have advocated for me. When I started ClinicianNexus, my vice president at Health Partners was very encouraging to me, and so was my boss at the time. She gave me a book that said, "Trust Your Crazy Ideas," and it was just a notebook for me to think through things, because there was no historical evidence to suggest that I should have done what I was doing to leave this great environment and then go out at 26 on my own and start this company. And in hindsight, I don't know what I was thinking, but I think that I just had so many people that believed in me, and then I was like, wow, if you believe in me, I guess, yeah, maybe you see something that I don't see. I think sometimes when someone pulls that out of you, that allows you to actually take that next step forward. So that was amazing. And I could think my father-in-law actually, about a month and a half after my husband was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, his mother unexpectedly passed away. So we got like a 1-2 punch. And then you've got my father-in-law, he's newly retired, and I'm finishing college, and Peter was in the hospital room. We just sat and talked when Peter was getting his chemo. He was just passed out, and we're just like, never thought I would get as close with my father-in-law as I did. And he became just my support champion through thinking through, you know, how to start this company, how to finance it, just, you know, how to think strategically about the value of time, all these different things. And so it was this really interesting kind of blessing and gift out of a really hard time that he was able to have that time and pour into me a lot of hours. I've never met someone who can listen as long as he can, because I can talk for a very long time. And so I'm very grateful for him. I'm very, very privileged to have a husband who's super supportive. He's just like, yeah, go do your thing. I think he's kind of happy because he plays video games. So then when I'm working a lot, he's like, oh, great. I've got some, I can go play my game. And he's very healthy now, by the way. I'm sorry, I should always mention that. But there's kind of little things like that. And then we had a lot of advisors that I was like, I don't even know how they believed in me because I was very awkward and very nervous. And in my first advisory board meeting, I think I cried the whole time. And then one guy had to call and he was like, we were trying to hire our first employee who's now our COO. And one of our advisors said to Andrew, just so you know, a lot of the support you're going to give isn't just doing the work, it's like emotional support for Katrina if you take the job. And he was like, okay, great. And so we have joked that Andrew's been just my support system to work through things. I could go on. Early stage employees that take a risk are amazing people. I have the privilege of being able to share all the good stuff that we do, but they're the ones that have breathe life into me when I'm crying, believe in me. That's absolutely incredible. And we just closed our $1.5 million seed round in December, and our investors are now our kind of this next step of believing in us. And the way they approached investing in us is my style of, they very much are our support system. They believe in us. They're taking that vote of confidence. So I try to also strategically place myself around people that are giving me constructive criticism, but also saying you have it in you, go for it, you've got it. And I think you don't want to create a tribe of people that tell you you're wonderful all the time, because then that's not really helpful. I know I'm not wonderful, I have a lot of issues and limitations, but be people that also believe in the best part of you and your true heart and what you're doing, that you care deeply. But anyway, like I said, I could go on. I've been so supported left and right, and I'm looking forward to a time I can be helpful. It's again kind of that you have to be really vulnerable and let people shape the awkward edges of you. It's good times. Yeah, I don't know what your experiences were, but
I mean, there's so many people just same here that I could sort of go on about.
Yeah.
But I think the most helpful thing has been having friends and mentors who can be really, really straightforward and honest with me. And it is so helpful to have people who can say to you, that shade does not look great. Let's think about this. And really give you sort of that space to carve that out. But then also people who to sort of help you realize all the things that you're doing. The one thing that someone told me once that I would encourage everyone here to do whenever you're having any doubt as to who you are, where you, or all the things that you've done, literally put together your resume, like actually put it together, list everything out, and put it away for like a week. Go back and reread it, and just see all of the things that that you've been able to do, all the things that you've been involved in. And that's just, I think, sort of having that affirmation that's coming from yourself. That's something that I found to be really powerful and really helpful. And someone else told me the other day that like they hired a copywriter to basically write their resume and like all of their community involvement, all those things. So that way it was from someone else's perspective. And then when they got to look at it, they were like, oh, this is really great. Like here's, to really just have that perspective, it's so different, because oftentimes I think we miss all of the things that we're involved in, all the people that we are serving and helping, all the projects that we're helping uplift. And so I think that's been sort of the biggest way that I found to not just like advocate for myself, but to also just take note of all the things that I'm doing.
Well, I think all of us have people that advocate for us that we don't necessarily take in. And recently, I mean, I can just reflect the same thing. There were, I think about the people that supported me emotionally when this started, and I think most of all my friend Ken Rogers, who a lot of people know who he is because he is a strong disability advocate in the Twin Cities, but how many times he would go to a coffee house with me when I was really frightened of getting this thing going and help me talk it through. But then I also think about some of our strongest advocates, our volunteer advisory board, who we've marked the 9th year of these people meeting with me on the first Saturday of every month, and they've never been paid a penny. And then I think about people like our Director of Accessibility Services, Sue-Ann Rodriguez, who signed on to this thing when we didn't even know where it was going, and and she made it her own. But the most important thing I think that you can do is open your eyes and realize that you have people advocating for you in ways that you probably don't recognize. And I try to take time to do that at least once a week to be aware of it, and to allow people to take the mission and make it their own. Everybody comes up to me and says, oh, WeCo's your baby. WeCo has never been my baby. It's never felt like it's belonged to me. It felt like something I was selected to build. And it's something that I think is going to live beyond me and everybody that's associated with it right now. So I think that that's part of what advocacy is just allowing people to support you and trusting that, and kind of acknowledging it, at least in your own brain, so you can benefit from it.
Cool. I love hearing you guys all talk about kind of the innumerable people that have supported you throughout, and I certainly don't want this to go in any sort of negative direction, but do any of you feel like there were pivotal moments where you had to tune out people who were not advocating for you? Or, you had mentioned the belief that software might be better equipped than people living with disabilities to set things up for people living with disabilities. And so to me, that's kind of like a negative noise that you had to move past and kind of advocate for what you were working on. So do you have a lot of those moments in your stories where you were kind of inundated with this, yeah, that's not going to work? Because it seems like you all had wonderful advocates. I would just be interested to hear, I would assume there had to be other noise happening, or maybe there continues to be.
I feel like sometimes in Minnesota, though, it's the, sort of like to your face, like, oh, that's really cool. And then just, no, but it's like, it doesn't really follow. I mean, to me, advocating is not just sort of stating the thing, but it's also thinking about how, like, what are the next steps for that? So, for example, if you share with someone like, oh, this is what I do design work, and then they hear someone else who needs someone to do design work, but like, to me, part of advocating is sharing that information along, right? Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes in Minnesota, I mean, what I've encountered is people who just, sort of stating like, oh, what you're doing is really interesting, but then whenever they hear that need somewhere else, like, and I'm the kind of person where, like, I think that we should, especially in the space that I'm in, I'm huge in terms of collaborating, I'm huge in terms of partnering, like, it's just, there's too much stuff, right? There's too much stuff. We have to, like, be constantly in connection with one another. But folks who don't really take that next step to say, have you heard of women in tech? Like, you should bring them in. Or have you thought about doing a focus group and actually putting together resources to figure out how to make some of those changes that your employees are asking for, your staff is asking for? And so I think that's one way that sort of that noise pops up, is just by a disengagement. Mm-hmm. But I think, there's just running a business and owning a business, and there's always going to be people who either plainly or not so plainly state that something isn't necessarily going to work. I think for me, that's more of like, just even outside of professionally, like a life question, right? There's so much that that is pushing up against, who I am as like a human, that even just me running a business is like, it's just one of the many things that I'm constantly getting pushback on, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so it's just like, at some point, I personally had to sort of figure out, what is this mesh wall that I'll have? What of those things will I let sort of permeate in, and what won't I? And so, when I got to this point, it was like one more layer, one more part of my identity that was sort of out there for people to speak negatively about, or to, to push back on. And mm-hmm. it's been sort of part of who I am, to figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, like a lot of people who live with disabilities, what we finally did at WeCo is created our own bubble. And mm-hmm. A lot of people, interns that work with us, say we created our own sense of reality. And it's always kind of shocking to me when I get out of the bubble and I see that people are still so surprised that a group of digital technologists, some of them who live with very severe disabilities, can make a business work. But you know, some of the pushback we got was, I still look at it and I go, people really used to say things out loud to us like we don't need to make our intranet accessible because we don't hire people who live with disabilities. And which I'd say, okay, say that out loud one more time. I mean, we have to understand, and I'm a little bit older than a lot of people in this audience, but I remember the days when it was normal to assume that a company would not have the capacity to accommodate people who live with disabilities. There's a lot of that that's still out there. So, you know, it's like the story of the bumblebee. The bumblebee is actually too heavy to fly, but it doesn't know it, so it just goes on and does it anyway. And I think that there's a degree of that we all have to do. That's been really well modeled for us that live with disabilities by people who've live with disabilities themselves and have advocated for disability rights. But we've just kind of built off of that. We have our WeCo bubble, and we just, you know, we're a bumblebee, and I remember having a business expert from a local university come in to try to help us, looked at who our clients were, looked at our business model, and the only thing that he could say to me is that this should not work. And then we found the right business advisor in a gentleman named Matt Willard from Augustana University in South Dakota, who got it, you know. And so you just build your bubble, and you just keep flying until you find what you need. So,
I love this question because it reminded me of my anatomy class in high school, where we had to all build a cell and model it off of something that we understood. And I modeled mine off of a church because I went to church all the time. But before I presented it, we all had to get up, you know, and like show our model. I was like, I know, like, it's kind of like nerdy and stuff. It's like a church, and like, you know, like it just like helped me. You guys don't have to resonate with it. And my teacher, Mr. Alvarado, just stopped class and he said, like, sit down. And then it was a 20-minute monologue on how we can't discount ourselves before others do. And I still haven't learned that lesson thoroughly, and I think that that's probably where this was a helpful question, because I think I discount myself still before anyone else can, so that I don't have to be hurt by people discounting me. Mm-hmm. So I'm first to say, I know I look like I'm 15, it's totally fine. I like, you know, or like, you know, I always make sure I'm very aware of my limitations so that others don't have to do that. And that might be, it's a defense mechanism, but there's also an element to that which I think, you know, I'm internalizing that myself, so then I'm my most, I'm just not helping myself really in that sort of, I'm my biggest enemy in that. So I think that, you know, like if I, tomorrow is our first board meeting, I have to do a lot of self-talk to be like, you deserve to talk to all of these absolutely incredible people that you respect and that are older than you, and that's okay, Katrina, that's, you know, what's going on. And I think I'm actually getting an executive coach to help me with this, because I think I'm, again, my biggest enemy in this. And a lot of it is that what are the stories that you tell yourself every day. And if I say, I'm really young, I don't deserve to be here, then I'll act like that. And then people will perceive me that way. And then what flows from that is probably that I act, you know, a certain way. So I think that that's one piece to it, where you teach people how to treat you, and if you treat yourself really well, then that allows people to learn that how I should treat you is also with respect. I don't think it has to be disrespectful. You know, it can be just a common truth that this is just how I like to be treated, and that, you know, it can just be a little bit more simple, I think, in that way. I always try to mitigate problems and risk all the time, so that's one of my like angles around that. But
definitely, I can relate to that, as I'm sure a lot of people can. To pivot just a little bit, I want to talk about the Twin Cities tech scene specifically. So, and you all occupy kind of different spaces in that ecosystem. I am very new to it, and so I'm so grateful to people like you for being so welcoming. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on how, if it's not already collaborative enough, how you feel like the Twin Cities tech ecosystem can become even more collaborative. Certainly, I'm going to start with you actually, but certainly from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, I think from a women in technology standpoint, I think there are some spaces from what I can see as a new person where it may be lacking in collaboration, and so I would just love to hear some of your insights on that.
So I think that the tech scene is the best example for the Minnesota bubble. So has anyone here ever been to any of the Mini-Star events? Okay, so I once invited a couple people to the Mini-Star, like I think it was Mini Demo. And I think it was like 1,000 people were there, right? There's like a whole humbuzz around it. And the folks I invited never knew it existed. They had never heard of it. They were like, wait, there's so many people here. It was just the biggest shock to them. It's somehow the best kept secret in the Twin Cities that like we build these massive communities and these hives where folks, honestly, I think really do a great job of collaborating and connecting. But it can be really, really challenging to just go in there and get yourself plugged in. It's taken me years to be able to kind of really be a part of the tech scene here. And I hear that from other people who are new as well. And I think we're really working on that, on like really, making this a lot more porous and bringing in as many people as possible on this journey. I think that when it comes to making it more inclusive, the things that I hear often are around representation. So I think that we need to do a much better job of showing the wide types of opportunity that we have in terms of tech. We need to do a better job of showcasing all the different startups that are here and the different types of work that they do, and not just always focusing on sort of the Fortune 500 companies that we're fortunate enough to have here. But I also think that there's a space where we can like think about how to employ tech outside of the tech community, right? So for example, there are some massive like construction and development opportunities that are popping up right now in Twin Cities. And I think that for us who are interested, especially in this intersection of like equity and inclusion and technology, we can employ a lot of that in some of these other spaces to help people think about how to make those spaces, more accessible, how to make them more friendly to like families and to all sorts of different people, right? And so I think that there's a way we can sort of seep outside of our tech communities and go into these other spaces and just be a little bit more involved in what's happening there, but then also hopefully pull in some of those other sectors that are a lot more segmented in Twin Cities. So I would love to see, I think, a little bit more of that cross-sector collaboration, because I think it would make a really, really big difference, especially in some of the larger projects that are happening in the Twin Cities. I think that another part of it is that just building a little bit more community amongst the different companies. So, business resource groups or ERGs and some of these larger companies end up being a really great force for building community for people who are who don't identify specifically as cis white male, right? And the cool thing about that is that you get to basically be in a room with people who identify with you in some way or another. You get to share stories and get to know each other and really build that strong network, which you end up needing for emotional support, for people to advocate for you, for all those different things. And I think that what I would love to see is for us to use our meetup groups and our different communities to actually build a lot of those cross-company networks and really sort of help grow that sense of belonging, even though you might be you might have like a really small company and sort of be one of maybe 20 employees within an organization. Just building that community across other companies that are similar, I think we'd end up with some really, really interesting, really interesting communities.
Cool.
I think that there are probably two areas that could use some growth in collaboration in the Twin Cities. I think that there isn't a great deal of representation of people living with disabilities in tech. Part of that, I would say, is our own fault. And having been in the position of being included at a lot of more tables lately. I would say that there are a lot of people who want to include people living with disabilities, but they don't know where to find them. And we can mysteriously be quite invisible, so that it's really up to us sometimes to make ourselves known and to ask for a place at the table. It's really rare that we ever get turned down when we ask anymore. So the other area that I think that there really needs to be some growth there is women in technology over the age of 40 and 50. I'm 56, and nearly every client environment I walk into, everybody is probably 20 years younger than me. And for some reason, when women age, we suddenly get perceived of having no tech sense. I don't understand where that comes from, because I remember I'm actually old enough to have been a young admin at a computer company that went through, the computer part company that went through the transition from typewriters to computers. And my job, my daughter loves the story, my job was to route all the emails to everybody's desks, because back in those days, they came through a central server. So I lived through that transition. And sometimes I think about the knowledge and experience that I have being a woman in technology in my 50s, that I bring this perspective and how that's been lost, because so many of my peers are phased out of their positions because they're not even asked if they need additional training, or it's something that I think that escapes a lot of people. You know, why do we not value people who are older, who've had more experience? So those two areas, I think, are areas that need growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ooh, there's so many things to chat about with this. The first thing that's coming to my mind is I'm on the leadership council for a social venture called $1 Million Women. It's based out of New York City and was started by a woman named Julia Pimsler, who started a company called Little Pim, learned that there was this big gap in any woman who starts any business of any type, kind of going from $200,000 to $1 million in revenue for your business. And there's amazing statistics that it's less than 3% of any female-owned business that gets started that actually gets to $1 million, and then it's less than 1% for the diverse women who can't then get funded, or and a lot of it has to do with, like I mentioned before, the mindset that goes behind how you do whatever you're doing. And so it's an interesting question to me that I'm actually thinking about this right now, where I had to connect with someone in New York to get the kind of support that I needed at that stage. So, whether that's a gap or not in the Twin Cities, I think she's seen that's a gap nationwide, that we don't have that support. Accessible coaching that's affordable for someone who can't, spend $30,000, $40,000 in her first 2 or 3 years of owning a business. So then you just don't have that support. So I think I'm actually processing myself, how do I stay engaged with that? Is it something that we branch out? They're starting to move into Houston and looking for additional locations that they would bring that content. But then that creates this other problem where it's like, wait a minute, there's already this activity going on. How do you link that up with lunar startups? And you've got a lot of other things going on. Sometimes I think it would just be great to have a big city hall meeting. Like, let's all go to the Minneapolis Convention Center and have a chat, and everybody take turns presenting, like, what is Beta doing? What does Healthcare.mn do? Now we've got United Health Group and Techstars, and Techstars is, there's all these things going on. It could be really fun to just have this huge chat about, is this really working? What's really beneficial? What do we need? Do we need to be unified? Do we not need to be unified? It's changed a lot since I started. Treehouse Health was this staple for healthcare startups, and now it's not really anything that exists to my knowledge present day, or isn't something that a lot of founders find valuable to them like they did then. I think it's just evolved. So I think there's also just there's probably opportunity to be a part of writing what the future of our community looks like and deciding what to kind of pick and choose from. But I would say I'm grateful General Assembly's here because I think that skills-based teaching is really critical. I think there's a need for that. I'm personally, we're looking to hire hopefully someone maybe as a part-time role or full-time role eventually, possibly contract-based for front-end development. And I think we're kind of looking at our team and saying, like, wow, we've got a lot of dudes just coding back here. Like, why don't we have some ladies in here that can do that? And I think part of that's, sourcing. How do we find each other? Kind of to your point where it's like you kind of have to insert yourself, and how do we source accurately and kind of find each other more clearly? That's so any ladies that are looking for a front end, let's talk.
Solid plug.
Yeah.
Nice.
I did want to add to that a little bit. I was talking to someone the other day, and they said Minnesota is the land of 10,000 nonprofits. I think that we sometimes have this.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we have this need to, we see something, and there's too many wires there. Okay, I need to start an organization focused on just that, and without really sort of taking a look at what else is happening. And so I think that we sometimes sort of start these different organizations that are focused on really specific challenges, and I think that that's great. But I think to your point, it would be really great if we also looked around and see how else can we collaborate as well and amplify each other and what we're doing rather than always starting another thing.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, 10,000. Literally, there's so many nonprofits here for everything.
Yes, yeah, I believe it.
I love the idea of a mega chat. Like, it's such an oxymoron, right? Having all of these groups and people come together for a chat. But I love the idea, and I think we should do it. I think we should just execute it. Why not?
Yeah.
So I know I said we were going to have more questions, but we are at Q&A time, which I think is everyone's favorite time. I would love to hear from you. If you have questions for all or one of these wonderful people, the only stipulation is you need to say it loud enough for me to hear so I can say it into the microphone, because this is being live streamed. And so we don't want weird silence and then having these. Did you just learn it was being live streamed?
No, I'm just kidding. I did that.
Gotcha.
Candid camera.
But we don't want weird silence and then a contextless response happening. So I would say just, there you go. Great job, Greg.
Yeah, I always have to do the one talking, right?
Yeah, sure.
I found it interesting, the volunteer board, you said of advisors. One of you said that, I think, over there. How did you come about that? Finding those volunteers to be part of your board, and to act like mentors for yourself, for your company.
So how did you find an active volunteer board to participate in your company? Is that a fair, abbreviated version of the question?
Well, if my career was a professional perfect storm, WeCo certainly has been too. It was very serendipitous that when I was working on MnDOT's ADA transition plan, I was working with an advisory board that had been assembled of stakeholders from the community who lived with disabilities, some connected with advocacy groups, and we became friends. And some of those people, including Janet Peters from the Great Lakes ADA Center, who was serving on that board in a paid capacity, became WeCo's first advisory board. And most of those people are still with us. They knew people who knew people. And we have just a tight little group of 6 people that I meet with once a month that help keep us on track. We have another one of our advisory board members by the name of Sarita Kimball heard me on an Easter Seals podcast and got my number and called me and joined the board that way. I think that if you just let it be known what you're working on, the right people somehow find you. I don't know how else to say that. I mean, I met them in a professional capacity, and then we kind of became a magnet after a while. So.
Yeah, you go ahead.
So this is a question for you, Lynn, again. So I'm one of the people that runs one of the 10,000 nonprofits.
Okay.
I also run a couple of other groups, and we have had at times people with hearing disabilities
So I'm just going to restate for the microphone. So what advice do you have for nonprofits who are seeking to make their events more accessible, perhaps for people with a hearing disability, or really any person living with a disability that might need hired help, I guess? So for instance, an ASL interpreter for an event, how would you recommend a nonprofit go about being able to provide that?
Because it's like $150 an hour, and when you're volunteer run, it can be difficult.
And thank you for asking the question, because actually WeCo has got really good at this because we are entirely bootstrapped. There are no startup dollars out there for entrepreneurs who live with disabilities. And we went through my retirement fund, and you know, it's been entirely bootstrapped, but it's possible for any group to do this because there are so many ways you can do it. We know a group that does trainings with the library system because the library system can provide the ASL interpreters. That's one way it can be done, you know, and that takes a little bit more coordination. I spoke at the New York City public school system, an accessibility conference in September, and they had an ASL interpreter, but they also had automatic captioning on a level I had never seen before. I was quite impressed with it. We've also had individuals who are ASL interpreters that have volunteered to work with us. And the other thing that I always say when people ask me this is check out the cost. Most of the time you imagine that it's this astronomical cost. There are also, I believe there are some groups that offer this stuff at a reduced rate for nonprofits. I know WeCo, we offer our services at a reduced rate for nonprofits. In the early days, we did things like, you know, we captioned some of our own things in the beginning because some of the people that worked with us believed in our mission and were willing to be okay with our less than perfect captioning. Now we do everything we do online with our testers and with the public is live captioned through a group called Caption Access, which was started by a man who's deaf, Bill Graham, who used to be a World Book Encyclopedia editor, and I play him on Words with Friends, and he creams me. But I think you have to be understanding that there is more than one right way to do this, and you can get inventive, and you can pool resources with other organizations that may be able to afford it. But we really believe that you can accommodate an disability regardless of size. If you're willing to talk with the person who needs it, if you can, if that's possible, find out what they need. And you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. It doesn't have to be this expensive way. Does that help? Okay.
And I'll add a little bit to that too. So if Minnesota is the land of 10,000 nonprofits, it's also the land of 1,000 philanthropy groups. And so I think that there is opportunities to have conversations with different foundations about them providing stipends just for that. And then I also would encourage you to just put out on Twitter that you're looking for an organization to cover the cost. I have seen that work really, really well, especially within the tech community. Just let us know what you need, and like I know I'll speak for myself, I'm more than happy to share out within our network to make sure that you're able to create the event that is accessible to as many people as possible.
Yeah, I think also, I know you weren't really asking me, and I know the event you're talking about, but I think too for people, so like childcare at events is very in right now, which is ridiculous. But even every time I hear it, it's like, oh wow, that's so wonderful that they're providing. I was listening to a podcast that was about people in Brooklyn, or it's located in Brooklyn, and they were talking about a local event, and they were like, don't worry about childcare, we have you covered. And so I think part of it is simply visibility of actually having it and letting people know that you need to have it. And so like at the Unhackathon that happened when you all provided childcare, kind of an innovative thing, but if people don't know that you need to provide it, they don't know how to provide it. And so I think using as many folks who are willing to share out why you want to do this, I think within all of these communities coming together, you might be able to find those resources. And then the wonderful thing is that people who go to that event, or maybe people are going to that event because they know that it's accessible for them and they wouldn't have otherwise been there, and that kind of spreads. And so I think it's a very worthy thing to get as many people and voices on as possible, because I think that would be really powerful for that event.
And I think people don't ask, because I cannot tell you how many times we have offered, or they don't take advantage of it, we have offered to look at people's PowerPoint presentations and make them accessible, because we do accessible documents too. How many organization committees we've been on for events, and they never ever send them to us to make them accessible. So there's a lot of unused free resources out there that I think just kind of don't get used. Ask.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Money. We know that for women, funding is what, 4 to 7% of capital funding, and less for that for women of color. So how do you fund what you do?
So yeah, the question is, I think for all of you, how do you fund what you do?
We're bootstrapped. In the early days of WeCo, we all worked for free. And that was the only way to get it done. And then we used, high interest lines of credit that are available out there. And yet, while those have costed us money, we wouldn't have our company without them. But it's, I think, one of the most disappointing things that happened to me in the last year was finding the Social Enterprise Alliance, going to their conference in Chicago, and realizing that all of the funding sources there, none of them fund entrepreneurs who live with disabilities. We didn't have the right mission. And all of them said to me, well, the government will do that for you. And I said, oh yeah? Okay. But I think there's so many of us that are out there that are just using our sheer force of will to get this stuff started. We find people who believe in it. There were days when I came close to going to food shelf because I didn't have enough to eat in my own cupboard to get this going, but I knew it was the right thing to do. So I hope other people have happier stories than that, but that was the reality for us.
Yeah. I'd say the answer always lies in what the trajectory of the business is. There's that delineation of, is this a small business, is this a lifestyle business, or is this a startup? And those are three very distinctly different things. So if it's a lifestyle or a small business, you'd more than likely just pursue a loan. And we have good support locally for specifically women loans from, I think it's Deed that has this loan process. So if you're starting a coffee shop locally, or you're starting the next Spy House Coffee, whatever it may be, that's a really good route to go, because your revenue threshold hits a cap on the market locally. And then if it's lifestyle, generally that's going to have to be bootstrapped, because again, you're not going to create a return that's even of interest to a VC. And then the startup is when you're thinking about those high margins, high returns, a bigger exit. And they say the 4 outcomes for a startup would be failing. It would be to be acquired, to merge, or IPO. And so to me, it's partly right sizing, like what is the potential here, what is that, and then it could be a more fair conversation about how you fund it. And so in our case, we're venture backed. Now our lead investor in the round was Hyde Park Venture Partners out of Chicago. And I would say that, the hard part for us wasn't necessarily, I think there's a lot of attention on getting women funded, so I don't think that was a struggle for us. Thank goodness. I think more of the struggle was articulating our vision and actually painting the picture that this isn't, again, one of those first 2 categories, and that you see a worthwhile kind of return coming in that regard. So that's been our experience. It was hard. The summer was really hard because we moved out to California for an accelerator program on Minnesota salaries. Just that was great fun. But yeah, the first 3 years were really, really hard. I don't mean to discount them. That was the most difficult. We're funded so we can actually pay our bills a little bit as individuals, and we're all like, Okay. I think there's an element of we miss the reality that that's the space you can actually think creatively and solve problems.
Yeah.
And it just takes a significant amount of grit to get to the point where you can do that. And I think there's that plateau that most people drop out because it gets really hard. But if you hang on, then you can get there. But
Yeah, I mean, you said the numbers around, or did you say numbers
I think,
around?
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
yeah, 3%. Yeah.
And I think for me, just knowing that I automatically knew out of the gate that I needed to figure out a better way to fund my businesses. So everything I've done has been self-funded, bootstrapped, hack the gap. We have been able to make revenue through like the events and sponsorships, and that's been really great. And we are expanding what we do as an organization as well this year, and so we'll have more opportunities to engage with different people in different types of ways and sort of diversify our revenue stream as well. I think there's a couple things. I think so. Deed is doing they're matching up to $35,000 of capital that you spend. And so if you are running a software company, I definitely highly encourage taking a look at that and those opportunities. I definitely would encourage folks to have conversations with the different foundations. A lot of them are starting to go into the investment field as well. In addition to just giving out grants, they're also looking to give out actual investment dollars. And so if you want to know more about that, I'm more than happy to kind of share a little bit more and specifically which foundations. I would also encourage folks to, go to the city halls, like go to a lot of the government spaces and get to know what the RFP process looks like. Sign up for their market programs. It can be being in like the government space. It's really nice because once you are able to connect to someone and sort of share your products and your services, it's a lot more straightforward to figure out how exactly some of those larger RFP processes really work. But that I definitely wouldn't jump into an RFP process. I mean, to be honest, the chances of that is just, for myself, I'll speak for myself, are very slim. But it is a lot easier to sort of get engaged with someone and see if you can pick up a smaller project and start to build a relationship that way. I definitely would encourage folks to do consulting in addition to their software, any software development work that they're doing. Like if you're building a startup and there's a software, that's been one thing that's worked really well for me. Yeah, I can try and think of other ways, but I've just, like, personally, I've had to be super creative about capital and just automatically knowing where my odds were and using that as a way of figuring out how to spend most of my time.
Cool. We are at time, and I am very strict with myself about staying on time. And so thank you all for being here. I have loved all of this. I'll clap. And thank you all for being here too. The last thing that I will say is feel free to come talk to me. I will be here if you have any questions about upcoming events or anything like that. Just let me know. That's what I'm here for. Or if you would like to run an event, partner on an event, that's pretty much one of my full-time jobs, I guess. And so if there's something that you have a dream of running and you just don't have the bandwidth or capacity to do it, I would love to talk. And I'm not sure if any of you are sticking around after too, but yeah, and I'll eat donuts and stuff. But yeah, I'm really glad that you all came. This was a really wonderful first, I hope, Women in Tech breakfast. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you guys.